Welcome to a HoN hero tier list video. In this segment, I will be ranking all of the heroes in the game whose best role is offlane, meaning 1 versus 2 in the long lane, or 1 versus 1 long lane, into a tier list. As we discuss each hero, I will give my reasons for why I have given each hero their specific tier rank. So let's go ahead and get started here. And as you may notice as we move along, the vast majority of these heroes will be strength heroes because they are naturally harder to box out of the long lane. So the first one here on our tier list is going to be Grynex. And Grynex for me is a C tier off-lane hero. So he is fairly good at going 1 versus 2. However, once the meta shifted in the game with the 2 pull camps, it became a lot harder for Grynex to kind of gain an advantage over his lane. Back in earlier days of HoN, it was harder for supports to deal with Grynex because there were no items like Grave Locket in the game, and there were no 2 pull camps for them to gain so much experience and gold, and Grynex would just bully them and simultaneously get experience and just be a nuisance and a nightmare for his enemy short laners to deal with. But nowadays, it's a lot easier to deal with him because you get more items as a support, you get more experience and gold, and you can kind of keep Grynex from snowballing, which is kind of the main strength of the hero. Now, he's definitely not that bad of a hero, but I would definitely rank him in the bottom half of the tier list when we're going to compare him to some of the other heroes on this list moving forward. So the next one on the list here is going to be Pharaoh. Pharaoh for me is a B tier offlane hero. So Pharaoh is a hero. He's our first strength hero here on the list. He doesn't really need a lot of items to be effective. Doesn't have a great escape, but he is good at being kind of disruptive with his wall of mummies. And pretty much all he needs is level 6 to start roaming around the map and setting up kills. He does get kind of countered by a tablet of command, but overall he is great for gank lineups and locking single targets down in his wall. And he's fairly good at getting experience as well as kind of being disruptive with his Tormented Soul. So he is a fairly valuable asset to have in a lot of cases, and thus I'm going to give him a B tier rank, but I can't put him in the A or S tier category because he's not amazing at contesting the lane. He does get some farm, but as we move along, I think once we compare him to some of the other heroes, we can see why we rank him a little bit lower, but still value him in the upper half of the tier list. Definitely a hero that I would consider drafting if I was drafting for a tournament. So our next hero here on the list is going to be Lodestone. And Lodestone for me is our first S tier hero. So what makes Lodestone the top of the tier list? Well, I think ever since Lodestone's been in the game, he has been arguably either the best offlane hero or one of the top 3 best offlane heroes in the game. Naturally tanky, has an escape, can sit on the lane and kind of almost man fight 2 people by himself. Very hard to box out of experience range. He is able to, if he has a hard time in the offlane, roam around and set up kills very easily because he has a long-ranged initiation stun, which is a very valuable thing in HoN. He deals high amounts of burst damage. Doesn't really need any items to do so, just needs levels in his head smash. And then his ultimate Shatterstorm is amazing throughout all stages of the game. So he scales incredibly well, he lanes very well, and he's able to bring down the enemy carry or tanky hero by hitting them with the Shatterstorm and letting his team do the rest of the damage. So he always has some value to him, and although his initiation comes on a delay with channeling up that ultimate, it is an amazing effect and very, very powerful. So he's great at all stages of the game and just a nuisance to get out of that off lane, even sometimes with 2 heroes. So he for me is an S tier hero, the first one on our list. We will move to our next hero here, which is going to be Nighthound. And Nighthound for me is going to be on the opposite end of the spectrum I'm going to put Nighthound in the E tier list. So perhaps maybe being a little bit harsh to Nighthound, but when it comes down to it at the end of the day, this hero doesn't really offer as much as a lot of other heroes do. He can be very disruptive in pub games because he runs around invis, and he can get experience fairly decently, which is what makes him an offlane hero in the first place. You could argue he is a carry hero, but let's be honest, he's not really that type of hero more so. He's more so just kind of sitting in lanes being a nuisance for the most part. So thus I'll label him as more of a position 3 hero. Excuse me there. And what makes him so weak is that he doesn't have any lane presence. He doesn't have an ability at level 1 other than sitting there invis. You can counter him very easily with a rev ward if you have enough disables, or if you have even dust and whatnot later on in the laning phase. He's more or less a sitting duck. Can't really do a whole lot other than sit there and gain experience. So it's really difficult to contest creeps. You're more so just sitting there for the levels, and then you're hoping to roam around and set up kills. But against players that are very aware of what the Nighthound is doing, it's very hard to be effective with this hero. Whereas a hero like Grinex, who's kind of similar in function, he has a stun. He has ways of dealing damage very quickly. The Nighthound kind of doesn't do that as well. He has to be more gimmicky in his playstyle. So more of a pub stomp hero, great at maybe lower ranks, but not really a competitively viable hero in my opinion. So yeah, I rank him very low on the tier list. Next one is going to be Keeper of the Forest. So I have already made my jungle tier list video. If you guys have already seen that one and you are now on to this video being the offlane tier list, you're going to say, why wasn't Keeper of the Forest on the jungle tier list? And well, that is because Keeper of the Forest makes it to the offlane or 1 versus 1 long lane tier list. And I'm going to put him in the A tier list. So this hero, I would say throughout his competitive history, has seen more play in the lane than he has in the jungle. And that's because he is a strength hero that can invis himself and gain armor and regen with his nature's guidance. So he can also pull the lane with his tree minions. So he can get lane control in the beginning, get some early levels, and then start to contest those pull camps with the trees, and also sit there and be very hard to push out of the lane due to that armor and regen. So he just naturally is very good at sitting there getting experience. You can set up ganks with his nature's guidance as well, because he can attack and root people, so people can gank for him decently. And then when he hits level 6, he has an amazing ultimate that scales throughout the game. A superior disarm and immobilize effect, which is going to be amazing. And if you can manage a restoration stone, this hero can just win you games, give your team so much lockdown. So also the fact that he can armor the tower, so it makes it very hard for the enemy short lane to push that tier 1 tower and get a gold advantage for their team. A lot of the times when you're 1 versus 2, one of the downsides is you get your tower pushed in very early, but Keeper of the Forest can armor his tower. So armor and heal the tower. So that is what makes him an A tier hero. He could almost maybe be categorized in the S tier, but I think that might be a little bit of a stretch. So I think I'm going to be happy with keeping him in the A tier list here. Our next hero is going to be Apex. Apex for me is, I'm going to place him in the B tier category here. So I'm going to put him a little bit higher than Grinex, but I'm going to keep him with Pharaoh. And this hero, he is a strength hero who's very slippery. He has 2 abilities where he's able to kind of be very mobile and hard to catch. So he is kind of disruptive, able to sit in experience range, get experience, really just needs levels like any of the other heroes on this list. And then later in the game, he has a very strong ultimate in his Armageddon. So once he gets levels, he can recover and split push. He can have an amazing team fighting ultimate presence, as long as he can do an okay job of getting those levels. So next on the tier list here is going to be Tundra. And Tundra for me is another S tier hero. So why is it I'm ranking Tundra so highly? Is he the same caliber as Lodestone on this list and higher than everyone else here that we've already talked about? In my opinion, he is. So Tundra, he might be a little bit harder of a hero to gain experience with, but what he makes up for that is so much throughout all stages of the game. He has what is called his Shiver, the bird that gives so much map vision, and vision, as we know, is very important in HoN. We can make so much conscious decisions based on what we see, which is why words of sight are so prominent. But he has a moving ward that can see what's going on, scout out ganks, scout out enemy positions, block neutral camps, so he can be very disruptive to junglers in particular. And he has his Couriel, which can pull creeps for him in the beginning of the game, so he can get lane control. Many builds work on the Tundra. You could go straight into a portal key to be an initiator. You can go for puzzle box to be more of a damage dealer and disruption hero. You could go for Staff of the Master, which recently got introduced into the game. I do say recently, it's been in for a while, but I personally love the Staff of the Master. You're able to just split push. You get a 4-second cooldown on your piercing shards. You get 2 Couriels that have like 1000+ HP, which slow. And it's just he's just such a valuable hero to have in your team, and he's been a competitively top tier hero for a long time. So I rank Tundra in the S tier, and I think he deserves to be placed up there. Next on our tier list is going to be Plague Rider. Plague Rider for me is going to be a D tier list offlane hero. So Plague Rider, he can be played as a support, but he doesn't really have an amazing skill set for being a support other than being able to deny creeps from people, which, let's face it, that can be useful in any lane to deny experience from people. So what you want to do with this hero is just get the lane control by denying your creeps every 30 seconds to 1 minute, however long the cooldown is, depending on the level of the skill. But he's good at getting lane control, which is what makes him an offlane hero. But he's not really great at contesting 2 versus 1. He doesn't have an escape, and he's not a strength hero, which a lot of the heroes on this list are. And he doesn't have invisibility, so more or less he just kind of dies to 2 stuns or 2 slows or whatever he's laning against. So his safety net is being able to play in his tower, but that is not always going to save him. He's going to be more or less a sitting duck. So sometimes you end up just repeatedly dying with Plague Rider. And if the players you're playing against are very conscious of that, it's kind of a vicious cycle. So you're pretty much going to be mostly useful for your ultimate, which is a very strong ability, and typically you want to pair that with something else AoE centered on your team. So he's more of a niche hero, and he's not really that great of an offlane hero. So these are the reasons why I have to rank him in the bottom half of the tier list. So definitely going to put him lower than Grinix, but I'm going to keep him higher than Nighthound. Next on our tier list is going to be Moraxis. And Moraxis, for me, he is an A tier offlane hero. So Moraxis, he is a very valuable hero, similar to Keeper of the Forest, and the heroes around him in the B and S tier categories. So Moraxis' main weakness is that he doesn't really do too much before he gets a portal key, so I can't necessarily rank him in the S tier, whereas a hero like Lodestone can still roam around the map and set up kills. Moraxis, unfortunately, even at level 6, he's still kind of weak. He needs that portal key, which comes usually around the 10 to 16 or so minute mark if you're doing a good job. So he does take some time to come online, but he has one of the best stuns in the game. He's very hard to push out of the offlane because of his arcane shield, and he has a stomp. And typically you want to pick this hero where the arcane shield is going to be very effective. So generally against support heroes with abilities that throw projectiles at him and he can block, and then he becomes this hasted machine running at you, stunning you, and that's when he starts to become very effective. So for all these reasons, I have to put him in the A tier. Again, if he was maybe a little bit better before Portal Key, I think he would be an S tier hero, but very valuable and an amazing initiator once the mid game comes online and later on. Next on the list is going to be Cthulhu Font, and this is going to be the last hero here on our offlane tier list. and I'm going to put him in the A tier list as well. So Cthulhu Font, he is an extremely difficult strength hero to deal with. Generally, he is seen paired with another hero, something like an engineer comes to mind, or a riftwalker, or something, or a demented shaman, something along those lines of secondary support, so he can be a bully in his lane against the enemy carry. But that doesn't always line up. Sometimes he needs to be played in a solo lane, and he does generally well as an offlane hero going 1 versus 2, or even 1 versus 1 against another melee hero in that long lane, because he's naturally very tanky. His trample has a fairly good distance as an escape and initiation tool, so he's very good in the laning phase. And he scales very well due to his passive, which is based off his strength. And then once you eventually pick up a Staff of the Master and something like a Barbed Armor, you return so much damage. So with something like a Staff of the Master, he scales into the game amazingly well. And thus, that is why I have to give him an A tier rank here. So I can't quite put him up there with Lodestone and Tundra because he's a little bit more situational. Doesn't lane kind of as well as a hero like Lodestone does, but when he's paired with another hero, on a dual lane specifically, then I think he becomes an S tier hero. But as an offlane hero, which I think is how we generally see him, he is an A tier hero for me. So that is going to do it actually for the offlane tier list. A little bit of a shorter video, but not a huge chunk of the hero pool here on this list. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. As always, I'll be interested to see your thoughts and comments about the rankings, and as always, stay tuned for the next one.